Now that it looks as if the Glazers could well be selling up at some time, although that is still a long way off from happening. We now understand that more than 50 Manchester United supporters groups globally have signed an open letter to any potential bidder urging any new owner to engage with them. And they've laid out a bunch of principles that they want to see. Now, in a moment, we're going to hear from the Manchester United Supporters Trust, Chris Rumfitt. Chris is going to join us in a second. The letter states, we hope that we will all have a new owner and that that owner will nurture, invest, and most of all, recognise that their role as steward of Manchester United is to run the club in partnership with the fans. In a way which recognises that a football club is far more than just a commercial asset. I mentioned that Chris was joining us. Chris Rumfitt of the Manchester United Supporter Trust is with us. Chris, good morning. You're serious about this. You want major involvement with any potential bidder, do you?
Good morning. Yes, we do. Look, huge numbers of United groups have come together. It was 50 when we published it. We're now up to 70 or 80 of others come forward to co-sign it. Our big message to a prospective owner is you need to invest in the club, both the stadium and the team. You need to respect the club's heritage and that of English football. And as you say, most of all, you need to work in partnership with the fans. Us, the fans and the owners working together is the best route for success for Manchester United and take us back to the top.
So you want to be front and centre of any deliberation with any potential bidder. Simon, what's your take on that?
Well, what you want and what you get might be two different things. You're moving into a different territory now of football club ownership, and football fans are going to have to accept that with that level of economic value that football clubs are now attracting, you're sort of wishing upon a genie if you think some philanthropic guy is going to come through the door and start saying, I'll pay £6 billion for this football club, this commercial asset, because that's what it is, and I will then do what other people tell me to do with it. It's entirely sensible to engage with the fans. It's entirely sensible to have a dialogue, which is a constructive one. And then after that, to make your decisions with the best intentions of the business that you've bought. So when you start talking about a shared ownership scheme with fans as partners and supporters, for the birds, if you're going to pay £6 billion for a business, why are you going to give fans shares for nothing?
Should you be getting a say on that, Chris? I mean, if someone's coming in with £6 billion, is it not up to them and only them how they run the club?
No, because a football club, as we've discussed before, is much more than just a commercial asset. It's a community, it's a cultural, it's a heritage asset. No one's talking about fans being given shares for free, by the way, which was the straw man Simon just put up. We want the opportunity to invest in the club and buy shares. But
good.
Really, shares
a value of £6 billion. Well, where you go then?
Well,
everybody knows what a football club is, Chris. Right, so get off your soapbox and look at the real world, where a commercial man walks through the door and decides he's going to buy a football club for £6 billion. What he should do is understand the values. What he should do is make sure that the active engagement of the eyes on the prize, which is a supporter base, is in some way included in his thinking. What he won't do in the real world, not in your world, but in the real world where he spent £6 billion to do it, is sit there and be in any shape or form influenced away from what he thinks is the ultimate aim that he has or they have for buying a football club. Now, you're talking about things like a debt-free takeover. Fantastic. You think that a debt-free takeover is what happened at Chelsea?
I don't know what happened to Chelsea.
Well, what Chelsea did was they got £2.5 billion worth of private equity money, which will require servicing. So what Todd Bowley did was went and raised £2.5 billion in the real world, not the world where you want to live, but the real world where big money comes into football and it expects a return. So he swapped an in-principle debt that the owners of Manchester United put on Man United for a real debt of £2.5 billion to a bunch of private equity players. It's entirely reasonable for you guys to make reasonable demands like, we'd much prefer you don't take dividends. If the football club isn't being successful, we'd much prefer you don't load it with loads of debt and then service that debt through extremely high interest rates, or you start taking dividends at time when the football club isn't performing. Those are reasonable discussions to have. You can't dictate to someone walking through the door, you must do this.
Well, look at
you must do that. You must commit to long-term spending plans. It's not going to be your gift to do any of that. It's all background noise.
I mean, if I owned a football club or in any other business, which indeed I do, the thing people I listen most to are my customers. We're the customers. We represent dozens of groups representing hundreds of thousands of customers. If a business owner doesn't listen to his customers, he probably doesn't have much of a future for that company.
Yeah, but Chris, should customers be on the main company board? Because that's what you're requesting here as well.
Well, we are suggesting that there should be someone on the board to ensure fans' interests are represented. And indeed, that's the direction of travel anyway. Premier League rules now require at least a fans' advisory
board. So you honestly expect, Chris, to be on the main company board of any new ownership of Manchester United?
Yeah, to make sure fans' voices are represented and the proper partnership between fans, who are also customers, and the club is...
If anybody else were to call you a customer, you'd be outraged. If I were to start this conversation with saying you are customers, you would have a completely different perspective on this conversation.
Yeah, but I think it's probably been necessary by some of your talk, Simon, which is absolutely...
well, I have to say, I think guys like you, Chris, are ridiculous. I think you come out and make statements. You come out and make statements like you're in Last Chance Saloon. This is a new world for football, and whilst Manchester United is a unique football club, and whilst it must understand the value of its fans, it's moved beyond that now. When you're asking people, or expecting people, or beginning to understand that a football club is going to be bought for £6 billion, you're going to get someone walk through the door that possibly does not have the same agenda as you would like them to have.
Chris, let me just take the listeners and the viewers on YouTube and Facebook to one of your principles. The second principle: urgent capital investment to modernise a decaying Old Trafford and the Carrington training ground, and long-term guarantees on squad spending across all teams. Well, aren't they going to do that anyway?
Well, we hope so. But what we've seen over the last 17 years is sort of stop-go investment. We're not saying there hasn't been any. It's been very stop-start. It's not been consistent. And Old Trafford's had no investment at all under the Glazers' ownership. So we very much hope so. But, you know, that is what fans expect to see to bring the club back to the top level of European football.
They spent a lot of money, the Glazers, though, haven't they?
They haven't spent any of their own money. There's been no investment from the Glazers.
In terms of player acquisition, though, Chris, you can't argue with that. And there was jubilation when Ronaldo came back, and they were willing to pay their wages of whatever it was, 400, 500 grand a week.
Manchester United generates a lot of revenue, and therefore Manchester United will always be able to spend. The Glazers haven't invested any of their own money in the club, and that's what we're looking for from a new owner, someone who will invest in addition to the resources the club generates itself.
If you were the potential new owner of Manchester United, would you be entertaining Chris and the rest of these supporters groups?
Would I be entertaining them? Yeah, I'd have a dialogue with them. Of course you'd have a dialogue with them, because fans, as Chris refers to, are a very fundamental part of a football club.
Would you be happy for them to be represented in the main board?
Of course not. No grown-up's going to have a fan representative on the board. You might have a shadow board where you have an engagement with them, but you're not going to put them in the boardroom because that's not the place for them to be. You're going to have discussions with them. Everyone knows what fans want. They want an owner to come in the door and produce a winning team and to share their values. And the challenge is, unless you're going to get somebody that was born in Manchester, that is deep-seated in the ideals of Manchester United, you're going to find a difficulty at some point where agendas diverge. Now, of course, you've got, scenarios like where you can point to Sheikh Mansour and Man City, but these sort of projects, and with due respect to our friends in Qatar, PSG, and due respect to what's happening in Newcastle, are not doing it because they particularly want and love these football clubs. They're doing them because they're vehicles for other agendas and other ambitions. And the same thing will happen here. Now, people like Chris can be listened to, and we can understand the principle of it, but it's very simple. We want to match all the best clubs in Europe, pound for pound. We want to have the best facilities. We don't want you taking any money out of it, because that's not the business that you're in. You're only in the business of giving our football clubs money. And ultimately, that's unrealistic.
There's nothing wrong with dividends being paid.
And there's nothing wrong with loading clubs. There's nothing wrong, Chris, with clubs being bought in a leveraged fashion. You just don't happen to like it. It's the same as what's happened with Chelsea in a different guise. Todd Bowley has gone and spent £2.5 billion of other people's money that requires a return on investment, but it looks like a different dynamic. The Glazers, whether you like it or not, have done what big business... When Elon Musk bought Twitter, he put £12 billion of his own money in and borrowed £30 billion from everywhere else. That's how big
Premier
businesses
League's
get built.
rules. You're wrong, Simon. The Premier League's rules would no longer allow the Glazer takeover. The way in which they leveraged the debt and transferred it back onto the club is no longer allowed by Premier League.
Well, they've just done. Well, Burnley. They must have changed the rules relatively.
Hold on.
They must have changed the rules relatively recently because Burnley did precisely that.
Well, but Burnley right now isn't a Premier League club.
But they did it when they were a Premier League club, which was last year.
The sort of leverage takeover we saw at United. The idea that there was this unconstrained capitalism in football is just not true. The fans have a voice and have power. We stopped the European Super League.
No, you didn't. No, you didn't. No, that's a myth. No, you didn't. What stopped the European Super League was the lack of financing in place to be able to deliver the deal.
The
To be fair to
government
Chris,
intervention, and the government intervened because supporters are their electorate and their voice.
Okay, if that's what you choose to believe. The reality is,
Simon,
the $5.5 billion that was put up by JP Morgan wasn't enough.
The European Super League was announced on a Sunday and collapsed on a Tuesday. You're saying the financing collapsed in 48 hours?
I'm saying that the clubs took a different view once they looked back at the resistance at the same time as looked at the dynamics of how much funding was going to be really required to do what they wanted to do.
If I can jump in here, Chris, the fans, you're right, Chris, in my view. The fans did have a big say in stopping it. They turned in their own clubs. We were there. We watched them do it. But, Chris, you have to concede, even I know, a Super League in some shape or form is going to reappear.
Of course it is.
It's going to reappear. So your point number 5, a pledge never again to seek entry to a European Super League or equivalent competition. Chris, you can put a line through that because speaking to the moneyed people in the game, they'll be back.
Well, we'll see about that.
But why do you object to a European Super League, Chris?
We object to a closed. The key thing about the European Super League we objected to, and all football fans objected to, I think, was this closed shop that certain clubs had privileged access.
So once that's gone, you don't object to it, do you?
In which they couldn't be relegated.
So once that's gone, which it will, when it comes back in its new incarnation, which it will do, and the meritocracy side of things is removed, you won't have a problem with it, will you?
I don't know what hypothetical competition you're talking about.
Well,
the
European Super League, once it removes the closed shop mentality,
more than any other competition, the European Cup is an integral part of the history and tradition of Manchester United.
Okay.
And anything which walks away from the European Cup is something I would very much struggle
Well, let me go back again, right? Because the European Cup has completely changed in all its guise. It's made up of 90% of the people that are playing that tournament aren't actually the champions of Europe. It's also got a coefficient which has a legacy benefit to it. So it doesn't exist in the format that Manchester United once won in 1968. And again, under Alex Ferguson, it exists in a very different format. So the issue around the European Super League was meritocracy.
Let's just finish with Chris on this one. Chris, when would you make your move to get involved with the new owners, if new owners appear in the scene and the Glazers
when they're in Last Chance Saloon?
When would you would you make your move to implement your involvement?
Look, we don't have the power to sort of enforce anything. I would say the move is for any bidders. We ask them to engage with us in a dialogue now. Even Simon said he would do that. So I think the move is for them to engage with us. But as soon as any real bidder becomes clear, then we will also in parallel seek to have a dialogue with them. This is about having a partnership and a dialogue in the best interests of the club, which we think is in the interests of both fans and owners.